In the dead of winter, 1856. Deep in the frost-bitten woods of southeastern Ohio, three newborn boys came into the world under circumstances so unexplainable that, to this day, whispers of their legacy echo through secret family records, and never once in the pages of a medical journal. They were born in silence, beneath a Quaker meeting house during one of the most dangerous nights in the history of the Underground Railroad. But what happened next? What those boys could do would go on to defy every known law of science and human behavior. For over 160 years, their descendants have protected this secret, hidden in letters, guarded in private journals, passed down through generations like a curse or a crown. Because if this story ever became public, it would shatter everything we thought we knew about human perception. Before I reveal what happened that night, this channel isn't for everyone. What you're about to hear doesn't just blur the lines between science and the supernatural, it rips those lines apart. So if you've got the courage to confront real mysteries, not the kind Netflix makes up, but ones buried in America's own haunted soil, hit that subscribe button now. And drop a comment below with your Shaw state or country. I want to know where the other truth seekers are tuning in from tonight. Because this didn't happen in a faraway land. It happened right here, in a town that could have been yours, in a basement built not for safety, but for survival. Chapter 1, The Meeting House. The town of Cedar Mills, Ohio, wasn't even a town by most standards in 1856. Just a handful of houses, a dusty general store, a blacksmith, and a modest brick Quaker meeting house, plain on the outside, quiet on the inside. But under its wooden floors was something few dared to speak of, a secret basement. No blueprints, no maps, just a trapdoor hidden beneath the speaker's platform, and a tunnel system ventilated by hollowed-out fence posts that looked decorative but carried breath to the desperate souls below. This was Station 14 on the Underground Railroad, and it was about to become the birthplace of the most disturbing mystery in the network's history. The arrival of Ruth. 3 days before the storm, a young woman arrived, soaked from the rain, belly heavy with child. She gave her name only as Ruth, said she was 19, came from a plantation in northern Kentucky, but there was something about her, something no one could quite name. She spoke with a strange grace, with the kind of careful diction that suggested forbidden education. The Quakers admired her quiet dignity, but were also unsettled, because Ruth knew things no one should know. She would predict visitors long before their footsteps were heard. She refused food that looked fresh, and was later discovered to be spoiled. And she spoke with an eerie certainty, correcting people not with argument, but with chilling accuracy. "That man who brought supplies yesterday," she whispered to Martha Whitmore. "He said his name was Williams. He's lying. He's never even been to Lancaster." 2 days later, the truth surfaced. He was using a false name. And he was asking questions. Ruth's warning had saved them. But none of them realized she'd only just begun. The night everything changed. It was February 23rd, 1856. The night the snow fell in thick, ghostly silence. Samuel Whitmore, the meeting house elder, was deep in evening prayer when the knock came. 3 taps. Pause. 2 more, the agreed-upon signal. But something felt wrong. The man who stumbled in was Joshua, a freedom seeker they'd helped before. But he looked different now, panicked, breath steaming in the cold. "They're coming," he gasped. The Garrett brothers, dogs, 6 men, maybe more. Someone talked. They know about the basement. Samuel's blood ran cold. For 8 years, that basement had been a sanctuary, never discovered, never questioned. Now it was about to become a death trap, and down in that basement, Ruth was going into labor. The birth of the impossible. What happened next was not recorded in any medical text. The midwife refused to speak of it again. Samuel's journal entries from that night abruptly stop. And the next day, Ruth was gone. The only trace of her left behind was a burn mark on the wooden beam above the trapdoor, and 3 infant boys swaddled in old quilts, sleeping soundly as if nothing had happened. But something had. Something no one could explain. And what those boys would grow up to become would change the rules of reality itself. In the next episode, we'll trace the bloodlines of those 3 boys and the chilling pattern that began to emerge across generations. Unexplainable visions, shared dreams, impossible recoveries from injuries, and most disturbing of all, the disappearances. Hit that bell icon so you don't miss what happens next, because this story isn't over. It's only just begun. Chapter 2: The Silent Birth. The immediate crisis was clear: evacuation. 7 people were sheltering in the hidden basement beneath the meeting house, including Ruth, whose labor pains had intensified throughout the day. Martha Whitmore, who had attended dozens of births in her time, had prayed the baby would wait another week. But nature, it seemed, had chosen this moment for something far more significant. As if summoned by Joshua's warning, a low, mournful sound rose from the basement. Martha froze. "Samuel," she whispered. "It's happening. Ruth's time is now." What followed felt like a fever dream carved from ice and panic. Samuel and 2 other men raced to guide the remaining 6 freedom seekers through the narrow northern tunnel, a quarter-mile crawl beneath frozen earth, ending in a tangle of oak trees far from prying eyes. Meanwhile, Martha and her daughter Rebecca descended into the basement to tend to Ruth, and stepped into something that defied every law of nature they'd ever known. Ruth was in full labor, but not as Martha expected. She lay motionless on the straw mattress, her face serene, her breathing steady and slow, as if meditating, not giving birth. When the contractions came, there was no tension, no screaming, no sign of pain, only stillness. "How many?" Martha asked, placing an ear to Ruth's belly. Ruth opened her eyes, glowing faintly in the candlelight. "3," she said, as if stating a fact already long known. "3 boys. They've been waiting for tonight." Martha exchanged a glance with Rebecca, a look equal parts awe and fear. Triplets were rare under any circumstance, but triplets born in a hidden Quaker basement as slave catchers closed in with bloodhounds, it felt orchestrated. Then came the sound of hooves and harsh voices outside. "They're here!" Samuel called down. "The tunnel's clear, but we can't move Ruth now." The next moments recorded in Martha Whitmore's private journal, a document not discovered until a farmhouse renovation in 2003 border on the surreal. Ruth's labor accelerated with unnatural speed. Within minutes, the first baby emerged, in complete silence. No cry, no flailing, only wide, alert eyes scanning the dim candlelit room. The second boy followed seconds later, then the third, each birth quiet as a prayer, each child arriving with eyes open and aware, as if they already knew they were in danger. Above, the trapdoor creaked under the boots of the Garrett brothers, who stormed into the meeting house with dogs and rifles. They searched every room, every nook, even the floorboards, standing at one point directly on the trapdoor itself. Below, Ruth clutched her 3 newborns to her chest and whispered in a language that seemed to ripple like water. Soft, unbroken, otherworldly. For 3 hours, the Garretts searched in vain. The dogs scratched at the floor, confused. The hunters grew frustrated, but they never found the hidden entrance, and the babies never made a sound. Only when the last echo of hooves faded into the woods did the silence break. The 3 infants let out their first cries, not separately but in unison, a single haunting wail that filled the space like the tolling of a funeral bell. Ruth was fading fast. Martha did all she could, but the bleeding wouldn't stop. As her life slipped away, Ruth whispered her final words. "They'll know things. They always will. Take care of them. But remember, they are not like other children." Chapter 3: The Knowing Begins. With Ruth gone and no official records of the births, the Cedar Mills Quaker community faced an impossible decision. 3 infant boys. No legal parents. No identity. Samuel Whitmore made a choice that would define the next decade of his life. The community would raise them together. Names given in the Quaker tradition: Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac. From the beginning, the boys proved different. Not in dramatic ways. Not at first. Just little things. Subtle. Easy to dismiss. But Martha Whitmore didn't dismiss them. She kept detailed notes alongside the birth account that chronicled what would soon be undeniable. At 6 months, the triplets began turning their heads, always in sync, toward empty doorways or windows. Minutes later, someone would appear in that spot. And not just anyone. Always someone troubled, or angry, or hiding something. By age 1, they could detect lies, not just big ones. Even trivial fibs caused them to turn away from the speaker. By 2, they could spot false identities. By 3, they became an emotional litmus test for the entire community. If the boys smiled and played, all was well. If they stared, whispered, or refused to approach someone, what that person was hiding something dark. Their gift soon became indispensable. The boys thwarted 7 infiltrators of the Underground Railroad in just 3 years, saving countless lives. Freedom seekers began requesting to pass through Cedar Mills, hoping for the protection of the 3 Watchers, as they came to be called in hushed tones. But this gift was no blessing, not to the boys. They were burdened, withdrawn, haunted by truths they couldn't unsee. And then came the long-distance cries. Would you like me to continue the next chapters in this refined and cinematic? The year was 1860, and change hung in the air like distant thunder. The nation was fracturing. Abraham Lincoln's election had ignited fears of war, and even in remote towns like Cedar Mills, the Underground Railroad was under siege. Federal marshals were scouring Ohio, and bounty hunters roamed with impunity. Samuel Whitmore, now gray with age and worry, tightened operations at the meeting house. But no amount of caution could prepare him for what the triplets were about to become. It began on a frozen January morning. The boys, now 4, had been unusually quiet, huddled together in their favorite corner of the basement. Heads touching, lips barely moving, whispering in that strange, liquid language that no one could understand. Martha Whitmore, still their primary caregiver, noticed the way they kept glancing south toward the tunnel. Then, without warning, they screamed. Not a childish tantrum, but a bone-deep, soul-shaking cry, 3 voices wailing in eerie, perfect unison. Their bodies were stiff, their eyes wide and streaming with tears, their mouths forming a single note of terror and grief. Martha dropped her cup. "What is it, darlings? What's happened?" But the boys gave no answer. They just screamed. For nearly 6 hours. 2 days later, the messenger arrived. A group of 11 freedom seekers had been ambushed 40 miles south. Among them, a pregnant woman had gone into labor during the attack. Both she and the child died of exposure during the journey back to Kentucky. The time of the capture matched the exact moment the triplets began their cries. Samuel tried to call it coincidence, but then it happened again, and again. Each time, the boys would fall into identical fits of distress, crying, whispering, shaking, as if something inside them had cracked open. Each time, news arrived days later of a violent betrayal, a death, or a capture far away. Dr. William Harrison was summoned. His observations were chilling. Their pulses synchronize, their breathing aligns, their temperatures drop, yet their brain activity spikes as if they are under intense mental strain. They are clearly responding to emotional trauma. But from where? Word began to spread. Quietly. Desperate families with missing loved ones began arriving in Cedar Mills, clutching hope and rumors. The most famous case was the Brennan family. Their daughter Mary had vanished on the road to Columbus. 3 months missing. No trace. Samuel, protective of the children, refused to involve them. But the boys approached the Brennans on their own. They stood in a line before the grieving mother, whispered. Then Isaac stepped forward. "She's near the river. Southeast. She's scared, but alive. The man who took her isn't who he says he is." Authorities searched a wooded area near Chillicothe. There, locked in the cellar of a remote farmhouse, they found Mary Brennan and 2 other girls. The kidnapper was a traveling preacher with false papers. He confessed everything. The triplets' reputation turned to legend, but the weight of their gift was growing. They laughed less, played less. They watched, always watched. When they spoke, it was with a wisdom that seemed ancient and distant. Their eyes had become dark mirrors, reflecting things no child should ever know. In his final journal entry, Dr. Harrison wrote, "These are not ordinary children, not even extraordinary children. They are becoming something else. Their minds, their spirits, are stretching towards something I cannot name. I fear what they are becoming, but more than that, I fear what they may awaken." Chapter 5. Children of the War. When war finally came, it swept through the land like fire through dry timber. Ohio was no longer a safe haven. Cedar Mills watched helplessly as sons marched to war, and as coffins returned wrapped in Union blue. Even the sacred quiet of the meeting house could not keep the blood from seeping into the soil. But while others fought with guns and sabers, the triplets fought with knowing. Their abilities had changed again. In the summer of 1861, they began standing at the windows of the meeting house, staring south with haunted eyes. Days before any battle, they would weep without reason. Isaac, the most verbal of the three, murmured once, "Too many people, too many will die." 3 days later, the Battle of Bull Run, a slaughter. Then it happened before Antietam, Shiloh, Fredericksburg. Every time the boys would fall into a collective silence. Then came the tears. Then came the wails. They were no longer responding to individuals in danger. They were sensing mass death. Their emotional compass stretched across entire states. They tuned in to the agony of thousands like a radio set to a frequency of human suffering. One September afternoon, a young Union soldier named Thomas Caldwell visited the meeting house while traveling home on leave. The triplets watched him closely. Whispered. Martha asked what was wrong. Ezra, usually the quietest ahead, stepped forward and said, "He won't see Christmas." He was right. Thomas died at the Battle of Ball's Bluff 8 weeks later. By now, even the most skeptical in Cedar Mills accepted what the boys could do. But few could look them in the eyes for long. They no longer behaved like children. They didn't run or sing or seek affection. They whispered constantly to each other, often in their secret language. They would freeze mid-step, as if hearing voices no one else could. And always they were together. A perfect triangle of silence and seeing. Then a stranger arrived. He claimed to be a conductor, a friend to the cause. He had the proper words, the right tokens. He smiled, but the boys only stared. Slowly, their heads turned in unison, eyes locked onto him, expressionless. The man fled that night. 3 days later, a warning arrived. Confederate scouts were using false identities to infiltrate stations in Ohio. That man was one of them. The boys had known. They always knew. Still, they paid a price. Even those who loved them began to feel unease in their presence. Other children avoided them. Adults grew stiff and formal, afraid of what might be seen, of what the triplets might know. They had become sacred and feared. And in the cold of night, when the wind hissed through the oaks and the basement grew still, some swore they heard the boys whispering in their strange river-like language, as if calling out, as if waiting for something or someone to answer. Would you like... The snow had barely melted when he arrived. He wasn't like the other visitors who came to Cedar Mills in search of the triplets. He didn't bring prayers or desperate hopes. He brought no name anyone recognized, no letter of introduction. Just a strange calm in his eyes, and a device clipped to his belt that blinked with soft, pulsing light. "I'm Dr. Alton Rayner," he said, "and I've come a very long way to see the Whitmore children." Samuel Whitmore met him at the door of the meeting house, skeptical. "What kind of doctor are you, sir?" Rayner smiled faintly. "The kind that studies what comes next." The triplets, now nearly 7, were sitting silently in their usual place in the shadow of the staircase. They looked up when Rayner entered, and for the first time in over a year, all 3 smiled. Without a word, they stood, walked to him, and in perfect unison said, "You came from the river of time." Dr. Rayner inhaled slowly, visibly moved. "Yes," he whispered, "and you're the reason I crossed it." He spoke privately with the Whitmores that night, revealing things that no one could explain or believe. He showed them papers that glowed without fire, drew maps of cities that didn't yet exist. But most important of all, he explained what the triplets were. "They're not sick," he said. "They're not possessed. They're evolving. Their perception is no longer tied to what we call the 5 senses. They perceive truth. Not just when it's spoken, but when it's thought, when it's hidden, when it's being born." Samuel crossed his arms, troubled. "Are you saying they're not human?" "They were human," Rayner replied. "But they're becoming something more, or something else." The triplets confirmed this without fear. "We feel everything," Caleb said. "We hear sorrow before it arrives," added Ezra. "We know who will lie before they know it themselves," whispered Isaac. Rayner nodded solemnly. "And it will destroy you unless you separate from this world." "What does that mean?" Martha asked. Rayner looked at her with great compassion. "It means they cannot stay." The final night. On the eve of October 5th, 1865, the town of Cedar Mills fell under a heavy, unnatural fog. No stars, no moon, only a thick gray quiet that muffled even the owls. The boys woke just before dawn. They dressed in silence, took each other's hands, and walked through the sleeping village. No one saw them leave. They walked to the same grove where their mother had once hidden in fear, the place where they had been born into shadows. This time, there was no fear, only peace. Dr. Rayner stood waiting, his strange machine pulsing gently beside him. "You're sure?" he asked. Isaac answered, "We've always been sure. We were never meant to stay." Rayner offered no farewell. He simply nodded, stepped aside, and the boys walked into the forest. No bodies were found. No tracks, no notes. Only silence. The legacy. Dr. Rayner vanished the next day. His device remained on the meeting house floor, set blinking softly for 7 days before going dark. Over the years, the story faded. The meeting house burned. The town changed. But strange things still happen in southeastern Ohio. Children are sometimes born in threes. Some speak to each other in languages they've never been taught. Some dream of a woman named Ruth and a basement filled with candlelight. And some just know. They know when danger is near. They know when someone is lying. And they always seem to arrive just when they're needed most. No one can prove it. No one can trace it. But those who truly listen say that the gift never ended. It was passed on, not through blood, but through something older, something deeper, something watching, waiting, whispering. And always, there are three.